Hi, folks. This is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report. You know, the DEC now is putting out a lot of different things on their website that I think a lot of you would find really interesting. I receive some of the information that I want to pass on to you from these DEC publications, and it comes right on my phone. And one of the things that they talked about this last week was trout fishing. And how trout fishing, in the beginning of the year, you really got to concentrate on deeper pools. The water's slow. And as time goes on, it's important to try to match what's happening for trout at that time of the year. And not too late in the spring, fly hatches really start to become very, very common and fill most of the waters. And so whatever these nymphs or flies that are rising up in the water become a huge part of the diet of these fish. And one of the things that they stress is that in this case, smaller is usually better than bigger. And what they recommend is that you use something that resembles these small organisms and nymphs in the water. And they say that it isn't as critical. Now, it's hugely critical to match the hatch when these flies are on the surface and they're looking up. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about this emergent period when trout will gorge on different things that are coming up in the water, not on the surface, but underneath. And so what the DEC recommends, and they probably have either a biologist or an avid trout fisherman, they're giving them this information, but they say that if you choose to use something that resembles these organisms that they're feeding on. And they say, actually, it doesn't have to resemble. It has to be the same size and fished in the same manner. And even if it doesn't resemble anything they're eating, the trout will hit it because they think it is. They think that it's some new being under the water that will taste good. That's putting it in the simplest of terms. So they recommend using like little Berkeley grubs, or they have another bait company, Trout Candy, that puts out these little bitty soft plastics and so forth. The encouraging thing to me is it makes me realize that there's tremendous, probably variation in what I could choose to use for these fish. And the same thing for you if you're going to do this kind of fishing. You don't need to have something so precise. They aren't that finicky. Now, once it gets warmer and these flies are hatching on the surface, and you'll see trout jumping every place, they are very finicky, and they won't hit anything else except the exact replica of what's coming up on top of the water. It has to be the same pattern, the same exact insect. And if you're using flies, you can't use live flies. You can't put something like that on your hook. So the flies that we tie have to be so precise and so match what the flies that are coming off the water are. Once that hatch is over, and once they stop that multiple feeding frenzy almost that goes on at that time, then they might hit anything that they see going across the water. Here's another tip that the DEC gives, and I think it made me think about this, and I think it's something that we might try more, because most people don't do this. And I'm going to go back to when I was a kid learning about trout fishing and using a fly rod. I wasn't the greatest fly caster or anything, but I loved it. And what I would use is either 2 or 3 flies on the line. All of them are different. One might be one that looks like a little woolly creature, like a natural type of imitation. Another one was the Royal Coachman. And the Royal Coachman is a fly pattern that's red and white, basically. And it doesn't, I don't think, looks like anything, any kind of fly. Maybe it looks like a little minnow. But I would have 3, at least 2, and sometimes 3 flies tied on say an 8-foot leader, spaced in between them. So I'm giving them a choice. And the DEC recommends that. They recommend that you use something that's deeper down, and then you also have something that's almost floating. That gives the fish a choice. But I think it does another thing. I believe in thinking about this, that it makes fish think there might be a school of bait coming by, and it might instigate some kind of reactive process that they might hit Whereas if just one were going by, they might not bother. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that I loved fishing with 2 or 3 flies. I thought it increased my chances tremendously, and I think it did. And usually, the first fish might be on one, then I catch another fish, and it might be a total different fly. So I was giving them a lot of choices. I was giving them a variety, and I think we could do that using anything. I think you could put like a drop shot type lure down at one point and maybe above it have a second one. Or you could be using, let's say, a tube jig on the bottom if you're not using a drop shot, a tube jig on the bottom and tied up maybe 6 inches above that, have a weightless jig type fly that would give them a total different look. It's something the DEC is even talking about, and this is a good time to practice some of these things. In the spring, there's going to be a lot of different species of fish around the same type of waters. The fishing can be great, and I think it might be a learning process, and it might give you a lot better chance. And I think it did me as a kid. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meisner with the North Country Fishing Report.